Hundreds of truck drivers, allies, and average ordinary Canadians descended on Ottawa this week to call on the government to do a better job at representing them. But what does the state broadcaster see? Just a group of angry Albertans. Yes, that was the tweet that CBC News put out, accompanying a story that had a very similar narrative to it. That this convoy that started in Red Deer, Alberta, and made its way all the way to the state's capital this week was really just a group of angry, disgruntled Westerners, which has been pointed out by a number of people to really be a CBC slur. The fact is, this may have started in Alberta, but this has been a nationally unifying event, as we saw from footage of people flashing their high beams and honking their horns as these trucks made their way through their towns and provinces on its way to Ottawa over a 4-day trek. But in spite of this, people that want opposition to a carbon tax enshrined in law, people that want a pipeline built, people that want better government on issues ranging from taxes and government spending to immigration, CBC looks at them and sees nothing more than a group of racist hillbillies. It's much like that sketch CBC did about the Yellow Vest protest on the alleged comedy show This Hour Has 22 Minutes, depicting them as just a bunch of redneck racists. Except we're not talking about sketch comedy here, we're talking about average Canadians, the kind that are the most impacted by decisions or indecision from the federal government, the kind that have to bankroll CBC but are clearly looked down upon by the state broadcaster more than they're represented by it. You've seen the CBC tweet about the angry Albertans. The story it's promoting isn't much better. It accuses the convoy of being a magnet for extremist, anti-immigrant elements. Except the interesting thing is that nowhere in the CBC story does it reveal what these anti-immigrant extremist elements are. It quotes a number of the organizers of the event who are very clear in saying they condemn racism. It quotes some expert on racism to say that racism is bad and whatnot, but the story doesn't actually acknowledge what it says it's about, which is that there's apparently this anti-immigrant and very racist sentiment that exists in the United We Roll convoy and some of the peripheral protests that have cropped up around it. The same thing happened in another CBC story about Yellow Vest protests that were taking place in Red Deer. Now, the Yellow Vest movement is different from the United We Roll convoy, but there is a lot of overlap because there are a lot of people that have very similar objectives that are grassroots members or at least supporters of both organizations. And the CBC story about these organic protests had less to do with the actual protests themselves and more to do with this mythical idea that immigrants or refugees might be offended by it because the protests were taking place about a block away from a newcomer resettlement center in Red Deer. Except the story, when you read the text, wasn't actually about the Yellow Vest protesters. It was maligning. It was actually focusing on a group called Soldiers of Odin, which is a group that has some very concerning views on immigration, and it's a group that's not represented by these mainstream protest groups and is actually outright condemned by them. But CBC decides to make them the focal point of a large-scale grassroots movement across the country. And of course, it's not just CBC. Columnist Tabitha Southey took aim at the fact that this event has roll in the title, which is probably the weirdest nit to pick on something like this, but she says it mythologizes what in her view is just a garden variety white nationalist event. That perspective that this was a white nationalist event was co-signed by Jonathan Goldsbie of Canadaland. Oh, well, it must be true then. Not. You know, I can't speak for every single person that attends these events. The fact remains that grassroots movements are by their nature grassroots, which means anyone can be a part of them, anyone can show up. It's the goal of the official voices of any movement to condemn the voices that are doing more damage and the voices that don't speak for the overarching aims. And when it comes to the Yellow Vest protesters and when it comes to United We Roll, we're seeing that. These groups are focusing on the overarching, unifying message that we need to resist what Justin Trudeau is doing to Canada on energy policy, on immigration, on taxes. And this is why the event saw so much mainstream support from Maxime Bernier and Andrew Scheer, from a number of Conservative members of Parliament, and from people in the media who are of a Conservative bent. There are a few of us out there that looked at this event and saw a message that was positive. So what the media will do, though, the mainstream media, is find the one person expressing a radical view and say that they represent the whole. Now, the worst part about this is that these are the same people that stand up and say that we can't do that with radical Islam, for example. We can't let one radical Islamist speak for the entire Muslim faith. And I agree wholeheartedly. But why then are they taking people that have radical views or people that are inarticulate and trying to make them the poster boys and poster girls for a movement that overwhelmingly is made up of the average, ordinary people that need to be at the center of representation in Canada's government? It's true that CBC just doesn't get it, but unfortunately, we still have to pay for it. It's never been more important to have a voice in the media that is standing up for the issues you care about and, more importantly, for the people like you. I'm proud to be doing that at True North, but I can't do it alone. There's a link in the description box where you can join the Heritage Club or the Patriot Club with a monthly contribution to let us keep doing this work that the state broadcaster and a lot of their colleagues are not doing. For True North, I'm Andrew Lawton.